Hello, everyone. Welcome to this February edition of the TCIPG seminar series on technologies for a resilient power grid. It's really my distinct pleasure to welcome George Arnold to be our speaker today. We've spent an enjoyable day and a half talking with George, and I'm sure you too will be very interested in all of this. A couple of logistical issues before we get started. If you're at one of our remote sites, please type in the chat window of the WebEx if you would like to ask a question, and then we will relay that question to George. If it's urgent, you can do that during the talk, or we will definitely have time at the end of the talk for a few questions. That's only available, there are two links, as you know, that you can sign into this seminar, so you need to sign into the link that supports that as opposed to the open link. Let me now introduce George Arnold. I think he's someone who really needs no introduction for most of you. He's the Director, Smart Grid and Cyber Physical Systems Program Office, and he's also the National Coordinator for Smart Grid Interoperability, the National Institutes of Standard and Technology. As you, almost all of you or most of you know, this is a very influential, important, and very large program that NIST is conducting to facilitate the development of standards related to interoperability in the smart grid. And closer to home, it's this group, or a subset of this group, and really a cast of 1,000 volunteers or so, who created the NIST document on cybersecurity that provides a lot of guidance for what we're all doing. George has a long history, also in the telecommunications area before he came to NIST to do this. I could go through a very long bio there. You see it online, but I think in the interest of giving George time to talk, I'll just welcome him and say thank you very much. We're really glad you were here with us today.
Thank you very much, Bill. As Bill mentioned, I've been here for a day and a half, and I'm really just amazed at the great capabilities at TCIPG. You have a really remarkable institution that's doing wonderful work in a very, very important area. The other thing I took away from my day and a half is what could I possibly tell you today that you don't already know? And this is like bringing coals to Newcastle, talking to you about smart grid and interoperability, maybe not so much, but cybersecurity. You're clearly the among the world's experts in this. So let me start with something that you may not know a lot about. Many people have heard of NIST, but not too many people really know much about it. So, well, that's not working, so let's try this. Help. I have an interoperability problem here. Probably an attack from some other country. There we go. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Super. So what is NIST? So you can see the mission here. NIST is really about supporting U.S. innovation and industrial competitiveness. The key word in this is measurement, science, and standards. So if there's anything that industry or in academic research that needs precise measurements, we probably have somebody working on it at NIST. We are a relatively small agency. We have a budget of about a little under $1 billion a year. About 3,000 employees, 2,000 are scientists and engineers, but we have almost as many associates or visitors, guest researchers who come and work alongside our scientists and engineers in collaborations each year. Our major locations are Gaithersburg, Maryland, where most of our staff is located, in Boulder, Colorado, where we have about 400 people. This slide shows you the sort of key areas that our research is focused on. Obviously, in the smart grid, we deal with energy, environment, physical infrastructure, IT, and cybersecurity. But we also do work, a lot of work in manufacturing, supporting advanced manufacturing, and even healthcare. So we're organized into 6 laboratories. Our work on smart grid is a collaboration between 3 of them: the engineering laboratory, where I'm housed, our information technology laboratory, and our physical measurement laboratory, which deals more with the electrical side of things. We also have a material measurement laboratory where our chemistry and biological work and materials work is done, and 2 user facilities, our Nanoscale Science and Technology Center and our Center for Neutron Research. So NIST's role in the smart grid actually is quite old. Our work in measurements for the electric grid date back decades. So, for example, we have a group that deals with accuracy of electricity metering and metering standards. Tom Nelson in my team chairs the ANSI 12 committee. We've been working for a long time in phaser measurement units and ensuring the accuracy of those devices. We have work going on in power electronics for applications in the grid, communications, timing. We also have a division that looks at building technology, and how to manage energy in buildings. The BACnet protocol, which is a widely used building automation protocol, was developed at NIST. So these are some of the traditional roles that NIST has played that we've drawn on in forming our smart grid effort. Our newer roles in standards are in interoperability and cybersecurity, and that's what I'll be talking about. So I understand that Hank Henchington will be speaking next month. Hank and I are colleagues, and we work very, very closely together. And in some sense, I wish Hank's talk had preceded mine because he could provide all of the background. So let me just take a few minutes and sort of give you the big picture on what the role of the interoperability standards is in the smart grid effort. I'll give you a picture of the overall smart grid effort and why it's such a complicated program for the United States. So let's start with kind of the biggest picture and just kind of comprehend the electric grid in the U.S. This has got to be, I believe, the world's largest electric system. We account for 22% of the world's consumption of electricity, even though we're only about 5% of the world's population. One thing that really distinguishes the United States in this and many other fields is that it's very, very diverse and fragmented. So we have well over 3,000 electric utilities of all shapes and sizes, ranging from very large utilities like ComEd or Ameren here in Illinois. There are hundreds of municipal power systems. But those investor-owned utilities are typically supervised by public utility commissions. The municipal power systems really are they report to a municipal, city council or something, a totally different regulatory process. And about 80+% of the geographic area, a tiny portion of the population, but much of the land area is covered by rural cooperatives. And they're very small utilities. So it's a very, very diverse system. It's also, as you know, a very aging system. And so when you look at why are we making such a big investment and having such a program in grid modernization, there are really 3 key things that are driving this. I would say efficiency, reliability, and sustainability. In the efficiency dimension, there are various estimates, but if you look out over 20 years, it's estimated that somewhere between $1.5 and $2 trillion will have to be expended just to modernize. And the electricity demand is not growing that much, so it's not like growing a lot of new capacity, but just replacing the aging assets that we have is estimated to cost $1.5 to $2 trillion. And the grid, as you know, operates well below its sort of overall capacity because it's sized to meet peak demand. And so if we can make it more efficient, and smart grid is one of the ways to make it more efficient, we can reduce the amount of investment that will be required to just replace these aging assets. You know, the average age of a transformer in the grid is about 40 years. About half of the coal plants that we have are over 40 years old. So these are very expensive assets that just have limited time. Reliability, this is kind of interesting. We do have reasonably reliable electric power in the U.S., but if you look at the SAIDI statistics, we run an average of about 2 hours a year of downtime per customer. Comparable figure in Japan is about 16 minutes. Even Italy has a more, if you believe their statistics, even Italy has a more reliable grid than we do. And Department of Energy studies show that these outages cost us about $80 to $100 billion a year. So if we can make the system more reliable, and we can probably make it a lot more reliable, that's a benefit to the economy. Sustainability, you know, reducing carbon emissions is a huge need that we have. And while we don't have a federal renewable portfolio standard, we do have 29 or 30 states that have adopted standards, some as aggressive as California, which is aiming for 33% renewables by the year 2020. Right? Other states are not have less aggressive targets, but one of the reasons we don't have a national standard is that the availability of resources is so it varies so greatly depending on what part of the country that you're in. And just to give you in Canada. Quebec, Ottawa have just huge, amounts of renewable resources from hydropower. So, what works in, let's say, the northwest of the U.S., where we have a lot of hydro resources, doesn't work so well in the southeast of the country. So, it's difficult. So, if we had a national standard, it might be, let's say, a least common denominator. This system, in terms of modernization, EPRI estimated in a study they did a couple of years ago that an investment on the order of, let's say, $400 billion in the smart grid kinds of technologies would be needed over 20 years, and their study indicated that the resulting benefit would be $1.6 to $2 trillion. So that's a pretty good return on investment, but one way to think about it is that if we make this investment in the smart grid, it's enough to pay for all of the investment that we need just to modernize and keep the system running. So this is sort of the basic rationale for our national priority on grid modernization. And in 2007, Congress embodied this in a piece of legislation called the Energy Independence and Security Act, which laid out a policy for modernization of the electric system in the U.S. and actually has a definition of what Congress considers to be a smart grid. In June 2011, the White House published a report, the National Science and Technology Council's subcommittee on the smart grid, which Pat Hoffman at DOE is the chair and I'm the co-chair. We produced a report that outlines a policy framework for the 21st century grid. You can download this from the OSTP website, and it gives you sort of a next layer of detail below the ESA Act in terms of what our strategy is, what the priority is on various aspects. So as you know, with the Recovery Act, there was $4.5 billion that Congress appropriated for smart grid grants, and Hank Kenchington and his team have been managing that program since then, and I just borrowed a few slides from him to give you a feel today of where they are. And so if you look at the $4.5 billion, there was $3.4 billion that was associated with smart grid investment grants. If you look at the matching, private match to that, it's about $8 billion of investment. This shows it divided into these three areas of transmission, distribution, and AMI and customer systems. So, just overall, we're about 2/3 of the way towards spending that money. Okay, that's where we are. But really, it's $8 billion out of $400 billion. This is really just a very small start. So there's a lot of the smart grid that is left to be deployed, and that's why getting the standards and the cybersecurity is right is really critical, and there's still time to do that. So just a few more slides that I borrowed with some results. DOE published some of these reports this week. This is a slide that summarizes from 3 different utilities what's been observed on peak and overall demand reduction from the introduction of AMI pricing and associated customer side systems. And what's really kind of eye-catching here is, let me see if I can, yeah, so look at this reduction in peak demand. 30%, 25 to 30%, 37%, that's huge, right? Only about 20% of the customers actually signed up for these programs, so the total effect isn't that big, but these systems can have a huge effect on reducing peak demand and therefore increasing asset utilization in the system.
George, what are the
yes.
columns?
The columns are different utilities. So OGE is Oklahoma Gas and Electric, and I don't recall what the other 2 are, but these are 3 different utilities. And the OG&E study is maybe the most significant, since there were 777,000 customers in that deployment. Here's just one more slide on observed benefits. This is in reliability. If you look at the SAIDI statistic, earlier I talked about 2 hours of downtime per year. That's in the SAIDI metric. Here they're observing an 8% reduction in outage. Again, that's I think there could even be much more than that, but this is really just a start of deploying this some of these new technologies. So when we think about in terms of NIST effort, the smart grid, we're really thinking about sort of an end-to-end system, and you're very familiar with the concepts in the smart grid. The point is, as all of these capabilities are introduced in the various aspects of the grid, from generation through to the customer side, and then the operations, the markets, and service provisioning, the introduction of the information management in a very, very multi-vendor environment really drives the need to have standards for these things to work together. And one of the points I make on here is that the smart grid, one of the characteristics will be ubiquitous network sensors. So earlier this week I was at Distributech, and I took a picture of one new product that was introduced. I won't tell you what vendor this was. It's brand new. I don't know if they've actually shipped any of these yet. They were just announcing it there. So this device is a I don't know, it's about this big, maybe a less than a foot square device that clamps onto a utility line and takes current and voltage measurements. It also, I think, captures waveform. It stores data for 24 hours, and so it's got to be polled during that period, otherwise the data goes away. It has built-in cellular modem, which has a GPS, so it communicates using cellular network back to a data collector. And these devices are relatively inexpensive. The line does not have to be de-energized, so utility lineman can just go along in a truck and clamp these things on. So I think that with this kind of technology, it's going to be the deployment of this ubiquitous sensoring is going to happen pretty rapidly. And I'm going to come back to this later when I get to the cybersecurity part of this, because this device, since it doesn't do any control, probably doesn't introduce much risk. But since this does have its own sort of using cellular, if you're in a utility that is using for AMI a different technology for communicating AMI data, like a wireless mesh network, what you have here is some diversity in terms of how you're collecting your, some data about the system and how you're communicating it. And I think that's one concept that we could exploit when we think about how do we deal with cybersecurity issues in the grid. So again, this introduction of these technologies, this slide sort of depicts the key sort of changes that I think are happening, will happen over the next 10 plus years as the grid is modernized. And so the bottom line from a standards perspective is that We're seeing a movement away from the legacy of proprietary architectures and interfaces to one based on open standards. And I think the parallel here to what happened in the computer industry is germane, where in the 1980s, those of you who, like me, are old enough to remember those days, and we had IBM's SNA, DEC had DECnet, Xerox had, I forget, whatever it was. These architectures were kind of closed; they wouldn't interoperate. Some companies spent, millions of dollars. I was at AT&T at the time, and we spent millions of dollars trying to integrate systems from different vendors. It just, sometimes you just gave up because it was too difficult. So with the introduction of the internet and web services and that standardization, it really has revolutionized things. And I think this is what is about to happen, is happening with the smart grid. So Congress has shown times of brilliance, contrary to what you would read with opinion polls about how people think Congress is doing. But the Energy Independence and Security Act, I think, was a very good piece of legislation, and it did recognize the importance of open standards to enable this smart grid to develop. And the Act included a provision that directed NIST to coordinate the development of a framework of protocols and model standards to achieve interoperability. Congress gave this direction some teeth in that it directed the Department of Energy to use these standards as a criteria in awarding investment grants. Remember, this was 2 years before the Recovery Act even gave any money, to the process. So Congress had this vision, and it also directed federal and state regulators to use these standards as they considered investments in the grid. So, standards. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the standards world. Most people's eyes glaze over because it's so abstract, and some people think it's boring. People who are involved in standards think it's very exciting. So what can I say? There are all kinds of people in the world. But it is definitely an alphabet soup. And when we got engaged in this, we identified 27 different technical bodies that develop specifications that have some relevance to the smart grid. And some of these acronyms I'm sure you're very familiar with, like the IEEE or IETF, IEC. There are a lot of consortia that play in more, let me say, niche areas. Most of these organizations are international in scope, but there are some that are sort of like the ANSI accredited bodies mainly are really have a national scope. And all of these organizations have been busy developing standards that have some application to the smart grid, but until this NIST effort that Congress sort of told us to get going came along, there was really no coordination of all this and no way for it to really fit together and see that it met a requirement to achieve this overall vision. So one of the things, again, Congress was very smart in the way they framed this, was that they said, NIST, you're not going to go off on your own and develop these standards. You're going to work with industry, with other agencies, with academia, with these standards bodies to actually convene and coordinate the development of all this stuff. And so we took pains early in our process to identify who the stakeholders were in grid modernization. And so I won't go through this in detail, but you can see we grouped these into 22 different categories, of which there are many types of electric utilities. I kind of alluded to that earlier. But you've got IT vendors, communication vendors, you have testing organizations, even venture capital, because most of the investment has to come from the private sector. So a big difference between what's happening with the smart grid, and I'm not just talking about the standards, I'm talking about the overall development, and what happened with the internet is that as the technical foundation of the internet was being developed in the 1970s and 80s, nobody knew what was going on, right? Except maybe there were people here who knew what was going on, they were tied into it, but it was out of the public eye. And when it got to a point where it had functionality that was really neat and useful to consumers and industry, everybody got excited about it. with the smart grid from day one, this has been very much in the public eye. Part of that is the regulatory model, because regulatory commissions have to approve a lot of the investments that are being made, and that happens through a public process. So it's good in this respect that we're getting everyone involved and having input to how this system is going to work. So just to recap some history, I think many people are familiar with this. The effort on the standards development got kicked off in early 2009. There was really leadership at the top. There was a White House meeting at which Secretaries of Energy and Commerce convened about 70 executives from, many of them CEOs from industry, to commit resources to the plan that NIST had laid out, a three-phased plan to sort of jumpstart the work with some initial workshops to develop consensus about things that could be immediately used, and then a longer-term plan that ultimately would set up a more self-sustaining, industry-led process to carry on the ongoing development of these standards. And third phase of this was getting in place over time a testing and certification framework. So this work resulted in a release 1 of the NIST framework in January of 2010. In February of 2012, we updated it. And again, it's not a heavy read. You can download it if you're not familiar with it from the NIST website. It provides some high-level reference model, identifies about 100 standards, or really families of standards. There are really hundreds of underlying documents. The cybersecurity guidelines I'll come back to later. And really this has been a foundation for a lot of other work going on around the world. So the IEC picked it up as a foundation for their work in the IEC portfolio of standards. IEEE has done the same. And we're working very collaboratively with our counterpart effort in Europe. So unlike as you know from my biography, I came from the telecom industry, and I lived through the development of the 3G wireless standards in the late 1990s, and we used to talk about that as the standards wars. And this has been very different, thankfully, a lot of collaboration internationally. So in thinking about standards, we like to think about use cases and scenarios in terms of how the grid is going to operate, how people are going to use it. So this slide shows some of the key use cases that early on were used as a foundation for our effort. We developed a high-level reference model. A lot of people have sort of used this as a sort of common way of conceptualizing the elements of the grid, some of the key interfaces. Some of the major vendors have actually sort of described their product lines and how they fit in this framework. So it's really, I think, provided a useful sort of way of thinking about things and common vocabulary. I mentioned how the private sector role in driving this going forward. Our concept was to do this through something called the Smart Grid Interoperability Panel, or SGIP for short. We set this up in November of 2009. At that time, it had about 200 organizations at the start, and as of December of 2012, when we moved into a different mode, it had almost 800 member organizations, and about 1,900 people have participated in its various work activities. It's been an open organization. We've invited international participation. We've worked hard to ensure that people can participate even if they can't travel through the web or teleconferencing. And what this organization does, basically, it develops requirements. What it does is it brings together all of these stakeholders looking at use cases for the smart grid, looking at sort of the interfaces within the architecture, what the requirements for the standards need to be, and then working with these 20-plus standards development organizations to the extent that there aren't standards you can just take off the shelf and use. If there are gaps, either new standards or revisions to standards, providing those requirements to the SDOs, and then through this process checking when the drafts are available whether they actually met the requirements. That's kind of the role of this organization. And the smart grid, as technology and requirements evolve, it's never going to be done. So we view this organization as being an ongoing thing. with a role somewhat analogous to the role that the Internet Architecture Board plays for the Internet. So that was the basic idea. And in January of this year, we have now sort of taken the next step in the maturation of this process. So whereas this had, during its first 3 years, been structured as a, let me say, from a legal perspective, an unincorporated association. So it was a consortium, but without a legal, shell. It was just sort of an informal collaboration among the participating members. It's now been set up as a 501c3 not-for-profit corporation. So initially, during the first 3 years, the government provided all the funding. Now with the new structure, about half the funding is coming from membership dues and about half from government sources. So so it's now a pay-to-play model, and I was delighted to hear from Bill that University of Illinois has joined as a founding member. So thank you, Bill. And would really invite you and encourage you to, I know you've actively been involved in the work, and I'm glad to see that will continue even as we have this new sort of pay-to-play model. So a little bit more about the SGIP structure, some of the standing committees. There's an architecture committee which is responsible for sort of evolving the reference model. And this is not yet done because over in Europe, our counterpart effort, which we've been working closely with, they've introduced some I think good new ideas, and so we're looking at how to take back some of those concepts as we evolve this reference model. Another committee is our testing and certification committee. The model here is, we want the private sector laboratories and certification bodies to set up programs to test for conformance and interoperability. So the role of this committee is to develop sort of the methods and best practices based on international standard for those testing and certification programs. Relatively new committee, something called the Implementation Methods Committee. A lot of these standards are new to some of the utilities. They don't necessarily have experience with them, and they are leery of new things. So this provides a way for utilities to learn from each other and from suppliers about how these standards get applied in operational systems, what experiences there have been, both bad and good, and to really help in the utilization of these and deployment of these standards. I will come back to this one, but those of you who are familiar with this Cybersecurity Working Group, it has a new name. It's now called the Smart Grid Cybersecurity Committee, so SGCC. Not to be confused with the Smart Grid Consumer Collaborative. I hope they don't have that name trademarked, because we'll have to change our name again if they do. But I'll come back and talk more about this. So we also have a number of what we call domain expert working groups. These are groups that are organized around home to grid, building to grid, industry to grid, vehicle to grid, transmission and distribution, business and policy issues. There's a relatively new group looking at distributed renewables, generators and storage, and an electromagnetic interference issues working group. These groups are really looking longer term at what the requirements and needs are. One of the major deliverables out of the SGIP is something called the Catalog of Standards, and it's kind of hard to explain what this is, so I just use the analogy that if you had a physician's desk reference for the smart grid, this would be it. So this is really a listing of the standards that are considered applicable, and really a compendium of information compiled by people who have reviewed these standards from the perspective of architecture, testability, and cybersecurity, and have basically written down their reviews from those perspectives. So what you'll find, so if you look at a physician's desk reference, you'll find information there about some drug and what its uses are, but you'll also find a lot of information about side effects, contraindications, and so forth. That's kind of the concept that we have here. So these standards are not necessarily complete. Many of them are still under development or evolving, and so people really have to know what state they're in, what the pitfalls are, if there are security issues that the cybersecurity reviews have uncovered. What do you need to do to figure out how to mitigate against those? This is the sort of basic idea. There's a process that is used to get community consensus on what should go into the catalog, and this slide sort of lists what I've just said in terms of the information that's included in the catalog for each of these standards. So one success story on the standards development that I like to talk about is something called the green button. You may have heard of this. This was a vision of the former chief technology officer at the White House, Anish Chopra. His concept was that wouldn't it be neat if every consumer in the United States had the ability to go to a website, click on a standardized icon, and get electronic access to their energy usage information. Right, and almost independent of what state their utility is in terms of deployment of technology. So if all their utility has, if they haven't done anything on AMI, if all they can get is their monthly utility information, they could still get that data in the standardized format. If they do have AMI and they have sort of interval data, you can get much more detailed information. So there's an extension of that capability, which is the ability to not just download for your own display, but to click on a button and have your data sent to a third party, either application provider or service provider, so that they could take that data and do something useful with it for you. So Department of Energy last year ran an Apps for Energy contest. There were 22 applications that were competed. The best two, I think, got $50,000 award, something like that. But there were some really interesting applications. For example, there was one application where you just click on a button, your utility sends your usage data for the last 12 months to this service, and they sort of optimize the design of a solar system for your house so that it's appropriately sized. Kind of interesting. And there are, at this point, over 15 million consumers that have access to their data electronically, and by the end of this year, 36 million out of 140 million electricity users. So I like to talk about this as a success story because, a couple of years ago, Google was trying to do this with a beta capability called the Power Meter. And some of you may remember that. And Google was going around to different utilities trying to get them to adopt Google's data format. And of course, the utilities didn't want to because they said next month Microsoft is going to be in here, and after that, someone else. We need a standard. So the availability of this standard, which was developed by one of those 27 SDOs, the NASB, the North American Energy Standards Board, in a very short period of time, the availability of the standard has now allowed this capability to be developed and is being deployed very, very rapidly. 36 million consumers represents about 25% of the U.S. population. So I referred a little bit to the testing and certification framework. Key deliverable here is something called the Interoperability Process Reference Manual. It basically outlines a set of methodologies and best practices for organizations that are setting up testing and certification programs for the smart grid, and there are now something like 7 programs that are in existence. So let me shift now to talk a little bit about what the SGIP is doing on cybersecurity, and I just want to make just a few observations that have occurred to me before I tell you about the SGIP's how its work is structured. So as you well know, one of the key issues we're all concerned about with the smart grid is now the vulnerabilities introduced by interconnected networks, and people often think about the ability of an attacker to gain access to a SCADA system somehow coming in over the internet right, through a sort of a corporate, enterprise system and somehow getting, down into the control systems. And clearly there's been, a lot of work that has, been done on this. The area that I know you all are very aware of, but I think is going to become an enormous, issue, is sort of the bottom-up attack, where we have these, ubiquitous sensors, which are, relatively, dumb. I mean, they're not dumb devices. They're very smart devices, right? And they can be, firmware can be updated through download, right? So I was looking at the ICS CERT database a couple months ago, and I was really kind of surprised at how few vulnerabilities were shown there for PLCs or intelligent electronic devices that you would find sort of at the endpoints of the grid. But here's one that I found that was kind of interesting. This is a controller that basically is used to control physical security, locking a door, reading badges, and so forth. And so someone found a vulnerability where you can, if you got access to this through a network, you can instruct it to open doors or to let people in who shouldn't be there, right? I was also astonished to see that I have a vacation house, and I bought a webcam recently because I occasionally get water in the basement, and I wanted to be able to see, when there was water, coming in. So I got a webcam that got good reviews on Amazon, and I was astonished to see, maybe it shouldn't have been, that it was there was a vulnerability listed in the CERT database. So somebody can now turn off my camera or turn it on, without my knowing about it. So I mean, this is a serious issue. So if you think about that grid sensor that I showed you a picture of earlier, so not only does this have a cellular modem, it also has a short range, Bluetooth kind of protocol, and you can update the firmware, which is a good thing because you can apply patches, but you've got to make sure that that's done in a secure way. So the other thing that I get very concerned about is the intersection of cybersecurity with physical security, and here. Just want you to think about a couple things. The left graph here is sort of a chart that shows the frequency of power outages in terms of the upper left part. Think of tens per year. As you go down to the lower right, you get less frequent, so like 1 every 10 years. The x-axis shows number of customers affected by outage. So this is just a scatter plot on those two axes of outages that have occurred over a roughly, let's say, 13, 14-year period. And so they don't capture like some of the more recent outages like 2003. So you could think of like once every 10 years, you get outages that affect tens of millions of people. That's sort of the frequency of these outages. The other thing I want you to think about is the outage in San Diego in 2011, this is very recent, where you had 7 million people in the San Diego service area that lost power in 11 minutes. And FERC published an analysis of what the cause of this was, and the actual cause, the failure that caused it, was one 500 kilovolt transmission line. That was the actual physical failure, and as you know, the design criteria for grids is n-1 reliability. So there's no way that the failure of one transmission line should have caused an outage of this magnitude. And so what was happening was that they observed that the system operators were getting inaccurate data about the condition of the system after the line went out, and there were several reasons for that. One was that the models weren't very good, the models they were using, but also they didn't have access to some of the data. So in some sense, you could say it was inappropriate control actions, following the failure of the transmission line that caused the outage. So in thinking about sort of what really bad things can happen with cyber attacks on the grid, this is something that I worry about a lot, because You could have an attack, let's say, on a physical thing. You get to a SCADA system and trip off a transmission line, and then you inject some false data in the PMUs or SCADA systems that are collecting data, or the tools that are analyzing the data, and you cause the operators to take inappropriate actions. You can now basically simulate these kind of things that occur, in nature, if you will, infrequently. You could make them occur very frequently, right? So in thinking about cybersecurity, we need to think about not just the computer security and the communication security, but also how to exploit the physical aspects of the grid and the censoring that's in there to provide some redundancy and diversity, both from the point of view of situational awareness and taking correct control actions. So in the SGIP, we have the cybersecurity, now named committee. Management team is as shown here. Marianne Swanson of NIST continues to serve as the chair, and she has a very good team from DOE, the Sacramento municipal system, and others. I think most people have heard of the NIST 7628, which is their signature document that provides sort of the overall security strategy. It provides a pretty rich set of tools for organizations, ranging from research to the product design to actually implementing these systems, an evaluative framework, and it's a heavy read. And what it is not is a prescription for particular situations and solutions. It's not a set of mandatory requirements, although it does reference the NERC SIPs, which I believe are the only mandatory requirements we have currently just on the bulk system. But what it points out is that there's a set of tools that each organization has to use to develop its own cybersecurity strategy. And some organizations, I think, are well equipped to do that. I think of utilities like Southern California Edison or San Diego Gas and Electric. They have a lot of resources. There are a lot of, among these 3,000 utilities, there are a lot of utilities that I don't think have any idea how to deal with this. They need a lot of help. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through this, but this sort of summarizes the contents of 7628. It's in the process of being updated, and the current sort of work activities of the Cybersecurity Committee are shown here. There's an architecture group, which one of their key tasks is working with the counterpart effort in Europe, which has introduced some some good ideas in terms of smart grid architecture. So we're looking at how to incorporate those back into, as we evolve our documents. Cloud computing in the smart grid is another sort of interesting new area. There is a rich opportunity for cloud-based services to do aggregation and demand response. And so as you introduce cloud architectures, how do you ensure that that security is achieved? The high-level requirements group is continuing. One of their tasks is mapping the high-level requirements in NIST 7628 to the version 5 of the NERC SIPs. There's a group that's developing a user's guide to 7628. This is to address the need of the many organizations that look at the 700 pages, 3 volumes, and say, this must be a lot of good information here, but what do I do with it, right? The privacy group, they have done a great piece of work in the current version of 7628. In fact, a whole volume is devoted to the issue of privacy, but the work's not yet done, and new sort of privacy issues crop up. For example, with the green button capability, sending data off to a third party. Some of these third parties want to be able to use that data, at least in aggregated form, to do things that could be, in principle, very, very useful to the country, But how do you do that, and do we have the right tools in these standards to ensure that privacy is preserved? So there's still work going on that. And finally, very, very important, and this is where if you're interested in helping, please get involved. Each of the standards that's being considered for the catalog goes through a cybersecurity review. So if you recall, in the early days of Wi-Fi, as the different encryption techniques were introduced in Wi-Fi, people would, every few months you'd read about somebody has cracked, the latest encryption protocol in Wi-Fi. What we're trying to do in a proactive way is that as a standard is being developed, look at it from a cybersecurity lens and see what vulnerabilities are there in the standard as written, and get that information back into the standards development process as soon as possible. So each of these standards goes through a pretty thorough review, and it's a very time-consuming, laborious task. So we need help. So please, if you're able, please join and get involved in that. So I just kind of want to wrap up here and then leave time for questions. Just some thoughts that I have in terms of looking to the future, where I see some of the R&D priorities. And I see a lot of these in the area that I've already touched on of cyber-physical vulnerabilities and threats. And so, false data injection, causing the physical system to do, bad things through cyber means. We need to think about, how do we use more information, from the physical system to detect when bad things are happening, and how to shut things down if need be. Another example of a sort of a cyber-physical thing, if you recall, about 2 years ago in January, Texas had a very widespread blackout as a result of low temperatures. And it turns out what happened there was that there was a lot of demand for heating. Some of the backup generation that was called upon wasn't able to start. They're not used that frequently. And as a result, they had to basically curtail demand on the system. So they resorted to rolling blackouts to do this. And some of the areas that they blacked out included natural gas pumping stations that were fueling the natural gas generators that were supplying electricity to the grid. And so they, as a result, they inadvertently cut out even more generation, and that resulted in cascading failure. So here's an example where if someone had just maybe through cyber means attacked a natural gas pumping station, you could bring down the electric grid because of that cascading effect. So you need to think about this, sort of the interconnection between these infrastructures and the cybersecurity issues on a that cut across them. So let me just close with one slide that you'll have access to. This is information about how to get involved in the SGCC, how to learn more about its work. If you want to get involved, please contact Marianne Swanson at NIST. And if you have more general questions about our smart grid effort at NIST, please feel free to get in touch with me. So I guess at this point I'd like to thank you all for your very kind attention, and I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Well, I was going to say first we'd like to thank you, George. That was a fantastic and very broad overview, but we thanked you, so now we'll get on right to the questions. I will say one thing, and I encourage people to come up to the mics for questions, and if you have questions online, it's a great audience. There are 52 other sites as well as the people that are in this room, so I think you were able to speak to a lot of people, and a lot of people may have questions. So I'll start first with Tim.
So this question is a bit directed towards the pay-to-play model that SGIP has went to. Since it's been an entirely volunteer organization, do you expect much of a curtailment in terms of the participation by moving to the pay-to-play, or how do you see that playing out?
Well, that is definitely a concern. If you look at the involvement in the predecessor model, although we had about 800 organizations that were members, if you looked at how many were really participating in the work as opposed to just observing what was going on, there was about 200. Okay, so we have, after just a couple months of our membership drive, there are currently about 94 organizations that have signed up as paying members, which is about where we expected to be. So I think we'll probably wind up within a few months with 200 or so, which would represent sort of the active, participating, base of organizations. To be an observer, the fees are less. I'm hoping that the fees aren't a barrier to participation, but the pay-to-play model is not unlike the model that most standards-related organizations use. So I think it'll work.
I'll jump in with one question. And without getting too deep technically, I'm really interested in the activity in NIST in cloud and the smart grid. This is something we've heard about. I've heard people say that even small co-ops in Illinois are using some cloud-based services now. What strategically is NIST trying to achieve in their work in that area, and where do you see that going in the future?
Well, that's a good question, and I'm not necessarily the expert on that. Jim St. Pierre at NIST would be a good person to get into more depth on. But one thing is sort of what is cloud computing? What a definition and performance. What performance attributes are associated with cloud computing that really define cloud as opposed to conventional computing? Cybersecurity and ensuring the compliance to cybersecurity requirements so that data can be trusted is another major aspect of the NIST initiative.
Carl Reinhardt, brilliant presentation. It was very informative. I do want to zoom out a little bit and ask you a question broader about NIST. You have a $1 billion budget, but first, how are your priorities set in terms of the standardization work that you do? And then, can you give us an idea of what the backlog is? In other words, the things that you're not doing because you don't have the funds to do it.
Oh, that is that's a big, a long list on that. In terms of how priorities are set, they come from a variety of sources. I assume your question is not necessarily about the smart grid, but just more generally? Broader. Yeah, broader. So, some of the work that we do is directed by Congress or, the White House. In many cases, we get requests from regulatory agencies who are looking for a technical standard, and they are, the law, requires agencies to first look to the private sector standards process before they do their sort of government unique standards. So a lot of the regulatory agencies will come to NIST to get help in getting involved in the appropriate standards bodies. There are a lot of what we do is through participation in industry committees in bodies like the IEEE or ASTM or whatever. So if we have scientists or engineers who are doing technical work and they're in one of our sort of program areas, and the standard would be a way of disseminating our knowledge into practice, we would generally get involved in a standards committee through which that tool or capability or method is being promulgated through a standard by being a participant, preparing drafts, doing studies for the committee on comparing options, this sort of thing. So, but the chart I had in my slide on our investment priority areas for our programs, those would be the areas that we would identify as sort of the key priority technology areas for our standards work.
So I guess the question on what is your backlog, more order of magnitude, is it you have 10 times the 10 times the backlog of work that you would like to do, or is it 10%?
Wow, that's a tough question to answer. I mean, we always have ideas in terms of things that we think we should be doing to support the mission that we've been given, but it would be really hard for me to quantify that with a number. Sorry to not be able to.
That's a question from
It's yeah. Yes.
Yes, thank you for the wonderful presentation. I had a question, probably a little tangential to this, but I just wanted to see if you knew of. So this example of the rolling blackout in Texas going out of hand because it wasn't coordinated with the other infrastructures that are in there. Do you see a role for NIST to play to study the interaction between different critical, the interdependency between the critical infrastructures that are out there, or do you see is somebody else looking into it at more formally? Is what my question is.
Yeah, no, I definitely see that's a role that we can contribute to, and in some sense we already are, because in the SGIP effort, the Gas Technology Institute, which is sort of the R&D industry R&D group for that industry, actually came to us, and at their request we established a new working group in the SGIP to specifically look at this interaction between natural gas and electricity grids. So I think over time, we'll see more opportunities like that, water systems and electric systems. So I think this is going to be a growing area of work, not just at NIST, but I think people are appreciating it more broadly, how interconnected these infrastructures really are.
Yeah, and especially in our conversation, gas stations not operating, and then that causing people not to fill gas during the outages. You realize that other than this traditionally considered critical infrastructure, there are other infrastructures that might disrupt stuff. And I was just wondering, given this role in the interoperability aspects of smart grid, is there sort of a mandate, or do you see in the future that's coming up where NIST can play a role in sort of identifying these interdependencies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. We are interested in doing that. I think our role in that would be somewhat different, though, in that we don't have a specific mandate from Congress as we did with the electric grid. So in these other areas, I think our involvement would be more at the request of industry or others who are sort of bringing these needs and asking NIST to become involved.
Okay, well, the time has come, and I've been told I need to close the session. Thank you, George. It was a fantastic presentation, a fantastic visit. We're really honored to have you here, and we'd like to give you a big round of applause.
Thank you very much.
I'll just close by saying our next seminar will be on the first Friday of March, and it will be Hank Kensington from Department of Energy. Thanks very much.